Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time, way back, to a city of marble and mud, of emperors and endless, overwhelming chaos. Imagine you've just arrived in the heart of the Roman Empire, a place you've only ever seen in movies and glossy history books. You step off the dusty road, and the air itself hits you, thick and humid, tasting of, well, we'll get to that. This isn't the stately, sanitized Rome of your imagination. This is the real thing, a sprawling, breathing, utterly disgusting metropolis. You can already feel the grime settling on your clothes, the noise assaulting your ears. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into Rome, a city you've only known through sanitized paintings and clean-cut films. The first thing you notice, even before the smells, is the sheer, suffocating crush of people. The main thoroughfares are a chaotic, shoulder-to-shoulder mass of humanity. You're jostled by a man hauling a heavy amphora of wine, nearly knocked over by a cart driver screaming at his oxen, and then jostled again by a senator's litter, carried on the shoulders of 4 sweating slaves. The noise is a cacophony, not the organized hum of a modern city, but 1,000 separate, shrill sounds all at once. There's the bleating of goats, the incessant chatter of merchants, the clatter of iron wheels on cobblestone, and the distant, low roar from the Colosseum. It's a sensory overload that makes your head ache within minutes. You quickly learn to keep your head down, to just go with the flow, because stopping for even a second means you'll be swallowed by the human tide. The infrastructure, while impressive from a distance, is a nightmare up close. The streets are narrow and often filled with garbage. Remember that famous Roman engineering? It's all there, but it's not quite working the way you'd expect. The aqueducts are a marvel. Yes, but the pipes often leak, creating small rivers of questionable water on the streets. The famous Roman roads, which you'll encounter soon enough, are only as good as their latest repair, and some of them haven't seen a repair in decades. The buildings themselves are a mixed bag. Rich homes, the domus, are tucked away behind high walls, but the vast majority of the population lives in multi-story apartment buildings called insulae. These things are the Roman equivalent of a bad college dorm. They're rickety, fire-prone, and often built with shoddy materials by contractors who were probably cutting corners for a quick buck. One historian I read even suggested that contractors would sometimes fill the walls with cheap rubble to save on good brick. Imagine living on the 5th floor of one of those, listening to the groans and creaks every time a wagon rumbled by. You can only hope it doesn't collapse on you in the middle of the night. So, you've made it past the initial crush of people. You're trying to find your way to a friend's house, or maybe a cheap inn. You realize that there are no street signs, no addresses as you know them. You have to rely on landmarks, the temple of this god, the public fountain over there, that particularly famous statue of a grumpy-looking emperor. It's a system that works, but only if you know the city. For a newcomer like you, it's a navigational nightmare. You find yourself going in circles, getting more and more frustrated with every turn. You stop to ask for directions, and a local gives you a rapid-fire series of gestures and names you can barely understand. Historians still argue whether Roman citizens had a better sense of spatial awareness than modern people or if they just got used to getting lost all the time. Either way, you're pretty sure you're walking in the wrong direction. And then, you pass a public latrine. It's an open, long bench with a series of holes cut into it, all sharing a single trough of running water. You quickly learn that Roman modesty is different. People sit shoulder to shoulder, chatting and socializing, doing their business in full view of one another. The smells are incredible, but what really gets you is the lack of toilet paper. Instead, they use a sponge on a stick, which is shared among everyone. You quickly decide that you can hold it. You really can. You've been here for less than an hour, and you've already been knocked around, gotten lost, and had to avert your eyes from a public bathroom that looks like a communal nightmare. You're starting to think you wouldn't last a single day. But don't worry, it gets worse. As the sun climbs higher, the air around you seems to thicken with an invisible, foul-smelling fog. You're on the Subura, one of Rome's most notorious and densely packed neighborhoods. It's a place where the rich and the poor, the merchants and the criminals, are all crammed together in a chaotic jumble. And the smell, oh, the smell is a multi-layered assault on your nostrils. First, there's the distinct, pungent aroma of human waste. Despite the impressive public latrines you so bravely avoided, many Romans just emptied their chamber pots straight out of their windows. You learn to walk close to the walls, not to avoid the crowd, but to dodge the sudden, unpleasant cascade from above. You even see a sign painted on a wall, a warning to pedestrians to watch for falling. Well, you get the idea. It's a surprisingly casual and accepted part of city life, a kind of urban free-for-all. Then there are the working smells. You pass a fishmonger, and the stench of rotting fish is so powerful it makes your eyes water. Next to him, a tanner is at work, and the smell of animal hides soaked in urine and dung, a common practice for curing leather, is so overpowering you have to hold a hand to your nose. You try to take a deep breath, and you get a lungful of something that smells like old sweat and sour wine. You begin to understand why wealthy Romans carried little bouquets of flowers or herbs with them. They weren't just for decoration, they were a personal air freshener. A desperate attempt to create a small, aromatic bubble of civility in the middle of this olfactory nightmare. You can imagine a wealthy patrician, sniffing his little bunch of lavender while a slave carries a perfumed oil lamp in front of him, trying to create a forward-facing zone of non-disgust. The most bizarre, and perhaps most terrifying, of all the smells is that of a Roman kitchen. You walk past a thermopolium, a fast food stand of its day, and the air is thick with the scent of rancid oil, charred meat, and something sweet that you can't quite place. You learn that many Roman dishes were flavored with garum, a fermented fish sauce. It was a staple of Roman cuisine, a bit like ketchup or soy sauce today. But the process of making it involved letting fish guts and entrails ferment in the sun for months. The smell of a garum factory, historians say, was so potent that it was considered a public nuisance and was often relegated to the outskirts of the city. But here, in the heart of Rome, you can still catch a whiff of that deep, unsettlingly fishy funk. It's everywhere, in everything. You realize that a good portion of a Roman's diet was a mix of fermented fish, stale bread, and whatever unidentifiable meat scraps could be found. You're starting to get the sense that you wouldn't just last a day here. You'd lose your appetite for life itself. As you navigate the smelly streets, you notice something else: the sheer number of animals. Pigs and chickens roam freely, picking through the piles of refuse. Donkeys and mules, used for transportation and hauling goods, contribute their own unique odor to the mix. It's a crowded, dirty, and utterly chaotic urban ecosystem where humans and animals are all just trying to get by. There's no separation, no animal control, no sanitation department to speak of. It's the kind of place where a stray dog could be just as much of a threat as a pickpocket, and probably just as likely to get a share of your bread. Historians still argue whether this closeness with animals was a sign of a simpler, more rustic way of life or if it was just a result of a total lack of urban planning. You're leaning towards the latter. You're starting to wish for a little more of that sterile, modern city planning right about now. As you head toward your next destination, you catch the smell of burning wood and something else, something you can't quite place. You see a public oven where a baker is pulling out a tray of fresh bread. The scent of warm, yeasty dough is the only truly pleasant smell you've encountered all day. It's a fleeting moment of relief in a sea of stench. It's a little comfort, a small reminder that even in this messy, chaotic city, there are still some simple joys. But just as you're about to savor it, a street vendor selling roasted chickpeas walks by, and the smell of his food is quickly overwhelmed by the ever-present putrid cloud. You realize that in Rome, even the good smells are just temporary islands in an ocean of the bad. With the smells of the city still lingering in your nostrils, you decide to focus on something more visual. You realize that to survive here, you need to understand the social cues. And nothing says Roman like the clothes people are wearing. You notice that the most prominent feature of a wealthy man's attire is the toga. It's a massive, semicircular piece of woolen cloth, often a pristine white, that's draped in a very specific, complicated way. You see a senator, his toga so voluminous it seems to have a life of its own, flowing around him in perfect, elegant folds. You also see a poor man. His toga a dirty, frayed affair. Or maybe not even a toga at all. Just a simple tunic. You learn that wearing a toga is a big deal. It's a mark of a Roman citizen. But it's also incredibly impractical. It's heavy, restrictive, and looks like it would be a nightmare to put on by yourself. You definitely need a slave or two just to get dressed in the morning. Imagine a toga party where you accidentally trip on your own drape. It would be a total catastrophe. You also notice the colors. While the wealthy wear that stark white, you see a range of shades on others. A purple stripe, or clavis, on a tunic or toga signifies a high-ranking official or senator. A solid purple toga, dyed with the incredibly expensive Tyrian purple, is reserved for the emperor himself. You see a man wearing a bright red tunic, and you're told he's a soldier. The colors aren't just for fashion, they're a uniform, a clear signal of who you are in Roman society. You realize that your modern clothes, with their bright colors and simple cuts, would make you stand out like a sore thumb. You'd be instantly pegged as a foreigner, someone who doesn't understand the rules. You'd basically be wearing a big, neon sign that says, "I have no idea what's going on." As you watch the crowds, you also start to notice the hairstyles. Men often have short, simple haircuts, a sign of their practicality and a stark contrast to the flowing locks of Greek statues. Women, on the other hand, have incredibly complex hairstyles, some of them so intricate they look like architectural models. They would use hairpieces, false braids, and an army of pins to create these gravity-defying creations. You see a wealthy woman with a hairstyle that looks like a series of cascading curls held up by a golden net. And you wonder how she even sleeps at night without it all collapsing. It was a clear sign of a woman's leisure time and her family's wealth. You couldn't possibly have a hairstyle like that if you had to. Do anything. Historians still argue whether these complex hairdos were a form of artistic expression or just another way to show off how rich you were. You're pretty sure it's a bit of both. You also notice the footwear. Everyone wears sandals, but they're not the flimsy flip-flops you're used to. They're sturdy leather, built for walking on uneven cobblestones and dusty roads. You see some soldiers in hobnailed boots. The caligae, and the sound they make as they march is a powerful, rhythmic clatter. You also see a group of wealthy men in a more delicate, closed shoe, a clear sign that they aren't going to be walking through the city's dirtiest parts. You're wearing your own modern shoes, and they already feel too soft, too thin for the constant punishment of the Roman streets. Your feet are starting to ache, and you've only been here for a few hours. You realize that a good pair of sandals is a necessity, not a fashion statement. As you navigate the street, you see a woman with a surprisingly pale complexion. You learn that this is a sign of beauty and a clear indicator of her wealth. It means she doesn't have to work outside in the sun. She probably has a slave to carry a parasol for her. You also notice that many Roman women use makeup, from white lead powder to rouge made from ochre. The lead is, of course, toxic, but in ancient Rome, beauty was worth the risk. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from the ancient Egyptian section? The Romans had their own weird remedies, including a kind of face mask made from ass's milk and bread. You're starting to get the sense that looking good here is a full-time job. And a dangerous one at that. You decide that, for now, you'll just stick to your own clothes and risk looking like a clueless tourist. At least you know you're not slowly poisoning yourself with your foundation. After a long day of walking the stinky streets, your stomach is rumbling. You've been invited to a Roman dinner party, a cena, and you're equal parts excited and terrified. You've heard about these things. They're less about the food and more about the show. You arrive at a wealthy home, a domus, and are led into the dining room, or triclinium. The room has 3 couches arranged in a U-shape, and you're expected to recline on your left side while you eat. This is a very different dining experience than you're used to. It's a social affair, with conversation and witty banter, but you can barely focus on what's being said because you're so worried about spilling wine on your tunic. You awkwardly maneuver onto a couch, feeling every bit like a fish out of water. The first course arrives, and it's a selection of appetizers, or gustatio. You see some olives, a few hard-boiled eggs, and some fresh lettuce. So far, so good. Then you see a plate of what looks like snails, and another of sea urchins. Your host, a kindly-looking man in a clean toga, gestures for you to try a snail. You politely decline and stick to the olives. Then the main course, the prima mensa, is brought out. It's a roasted wild boar. A very impressive sight. But then the server brings out a platter of what looks like dormice. Roasted and served with honey and poppy seeds. You remember reading about this. Roman emperors and the wealthy would fatten up these little rodents in special jars. They were considered a great delicacy. You can't bring yourself to try one. So you cut a small piece of boar and hope no one notices your lack of adventurous eating. And then there's the garum. That fermented fish sauce you smelled earlier. It's on the table, in a small bowl, and everyone is dipping their food in it. You decide to be brave and try a tiny bit with your bread. The taste is incredibly strong. A salty, umami kick that's unlike anything you've ever had. It's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely an acquired taste. You also notice the wine. It's a sweet, heavy affair, often mixed with water, and sometimes even with salt or spices. You take a sip and are surprised by how different it is from modern wine. It's thick and syrupy, almost like a cordial. The Romans didn't have a good grasp of microbiology, so their wine would often turn into vinegar quickly. Adding water or honey was a way to make it more palatable and to make it last longer. But the most dangerous part of the meal, you realize, isn't the dormice or the snails, but the cookware itself. Many Roman cooking vessels and drinking cups were made of lead, and they would often sweeten their wine by boiling it in lead pots. This process, while it made the wine taste better, also leached lead into the drink. Historians still argue whether lead poisoning was a significant contributor to the decline of the Roman elite. But as you watch your host casually sip from a lead cup, you can't help but feel a chill run down your spine. A simple dinner party, you realize, could be a slow form of suicide. You quickly decide to stick to the boiled water, no matter how unappetizing it is. The conversation around you is lively. The Romans are a sarcastic bunch, and they love to gossip. They talk about politics, about the latest chariot races, and about the love affairs of the rich and famous. You try to join in, but you don't really have anything to say. You can't believe how much time and effort they put into a meal. A Roman dinner party could last for hours, and it was a crucial part of social life. You realize that a big part of surviving in Rome is not just knowing how to act, but knowing what to eat, or, in your case, what to avoid eating. You pass on the dormice, skip the snails, and drink your water. You're trying to last a day, not lose your mind or your insides in the process. With a full stomach, or at least, a stomach that hasn't yet revolted, you decide to do what every good Roman does in the afternoon: head to the baths. You've heard about the Roman bathhouses, the thermae, and you picture a quiet, serene spa with bubbling pools and soft music. You couldn't be more wrong. You arrive at the baths of Caracalla, a massive complex of marble and arches, and the first thing that hits you is the noise. It's a riot of sound, the splashing of water, the shouts of men exercising, the calls of vendors selling snacks and oils, and the loud, rhythmic thwack of a ball being hit against a wall. It's less of a spa and more of a combination gym, swimming pool, and public forum all rolled into one chaotic ball. You're jostled by a man who's just had his hair plucked out by a barber, and his yelps of pain are punctuated by the grunts of a weightlifter nearby. You quickly realize that a trip to the baths is a whole day affair. You move through a series of rooms, each one hotter than the last. First, the apodyterium, the changing room. It's a busy, bustling space, and you learn quickly that you should probably give your clothes to a slave to watch, or they might disappear. Next, you enter the palaestra, an open-air courtyard where people are exercising. You see men wrestling, running, and lifting weights. It's all a bit much, and you decide to skip the workout and head straight for the water. The first pool you enter is the frigidarium, a cold plunge pool. The water is refreshing, but you notice a few suspicious-looking items floating in it, and you decide to get out quickly. The next room is the tepidarium, a warm, humid space meant to prepare your body for the heat. It's here that you see men and women socializing, chatting, and gossiping. Remember that open-plan latrine? This is the social equivalent, just a little less smelly. You try to relax, but you can't help but feel a little on edge. The baths are a great place to meet people, but they're also a great place to catch every disease imaginable. Without modern sanitation, the pools and rooms are a breeding ground for germs. You can't help but think about all the people who have been in the water before you. The thought alone makes you want to get out. You also notice that not everyone is here for a good, clean time. Many people are gambling, or just plain lounging around. There's a barber giving a shave, and you try not to think about how often he cleans his razor. Finally, you make your way to the caldarium, the hot room. The air is thick with steam, and you can barely see the person next to you. You sit on a bench, and a slave comes over to offer you a scrape. They use a strigil, a curved metal tool, to scrape the sweat, dirt, and oil from your skin. It's a surprisingly effective way to get clean, but the idea of someone scraping your skin with a metal tool feels a little too aggressive. You politely decline and just sit in the steam. You can feel the dirt from the day melting off your skin. And for a moment, it feels good, but then you start thinking about the shared sponge in the latrine and the general lack of hygiene. And you're not so sure. Historians still argue whether the Roman obsession with cleanliness was about hygiene or just a social ritual. You're starting to think it was just a way to feel clean in a city that was anything but. As you leave the baths, you're a little cleaner, but also a little more paranoid. You notice a man with a surprisingly cheerful expression, and you learn that he's a professional masseuse. The Romans loved a good massage, but they would often use strange and pungent oils. A professional masseuse would often use a combination of olive oil and something like vinegar or myrrh. It's an interesting tidbit, but you're just glad you didn't have to get a massage with crocodile dung. Clean-ish and tired from your bathhouse excursion, you decide to do what any visitor to Rome must: go to the Colosseum. You've seen pictures, you've watched movies, but nothing prepares you for the sheer scale of the amphitheater. It's a massive, looming structure of travertine stone, a silent testament to a city built on spectacle and blood. As you approach, the crowd grows thicker, a low hum of excitement rippling through the air. You pass vendors selling spiced sausage, sour wine, and small clay figurines of famous gladiators. It's a carnival atmosphere, but with an undercurrent of something much darker. The Romans are here for a show, and you know exactly what kind of show it is. You shuffle along with the thousands of other people, moving through the tiered archways, a part of a human river flowing toward the arena floor. You find a place to sit on the hard stone benches, and the view is breathtaking. The arena floor, covered in a layer of sand, is in the middle, and the towering walls of the stands rise up around you. You're told there are trapdoors on the floor, and you can imagine exotic animals and gladiators bursting forth from the depths below. You're also told that the arena could be flooded for naval battles. A thought that seems almost unbelievable given the sheer size of the place. Historians still argue whether the naval battles were a common event or just a one-off spectacle. But the idea of them is almost as impressive as the architecture itself. The sun is hot, and you can already feel the heat of the stone seeping into your clothes. You are a small, insignificant dot in a sea of 50,000 spectators. All here for the same brutal reason. The show begins with a parade, or pompa, of gladiators, musicians, and performers. They march around the arena floor, their armor gleaming in the sun. The gladiators are an impressive sight, with their muscular bodies and their strange, archaic equipment. Some have a large shield and a short sword. Others have a trident and a net. And still others are on horseback. They are the celebrities of their day, and the crowd roars in recognition of a famous face. You can hear people shouting their names, betting on who will win. It's a weird mix of hero worship and bloodlust. You feel a strange kind of excitement, a morbid curiosity that you try to suppress. But you can't deny that you're drawn in by the spectacle. The first fight begins, and two gladiators, a Murmillo with his fish-crested helmet and a Retiarius with his net and trident, face off. The fight is fast, brutal, and surprisingly short. The Retiarius is skilled, but the Murmillo is a master of his craft. And with a quick, decisive strike, he ends the fight. The crowd roars in approval. The losing gladiator, lying on the sand, looks up at the stands. The crowd is given a choice: thumbs up for mercy, thumbs down for death. You watch as the crowd, a single, terrifying entity, signals their decision. The emperor, or the man in charge of the games, makes the final call. The losing gladiator is spared, and the crowd cheers in approval. You learn that not every fight ends in death. A gladiator's life is valuable, and they were expensive to train. But you also know that sometimes, A losing gladiator is not so lucky. And then comes the highlight of the day, a hunt of exotic animals. A venatio. You watch in horror as a lion is released onto the arena floor. And a series of hunters, armed with spears and bows, try to take it down. The lion is magnificent, but it's no match for the armed men. It's a cruel, unfair fight, and you feel a pang of sadness for the animal. But the crowd loves it, and they cheer every time an animal falls. You realize that this is entertainment for them, a distraction from the harsh realities of their daily lives. For them, it's not about the morality of the situation, it's about the show. You're starting to think that you couldn't just last a day here. You'd probably lose a piece of your soul. A truly quirky Roman tidbit, if there ever was one, is that they would even flood the Colosseum for simulated naval battles. Historians still argue whether this was a common feature of the games or a one-off spectacle. But the engineering required for it is mind-boggling. Leaving the Colosseum, you find yourself on a side street as night begins to fall. The day's events, particularly the gladiatorial combat, have left you feeling a little raw, a little out of place. You decide to find a quiet place to get a bite to eat before heading to your temporary lodgings. The Roman night, you quickly discover, is a different beast entirely from the day. The bustling crowds of the Forum and the main streets have thinned out, replaced by a more shadowy, and frankly, more dangerous clientele. The city that was a cacophony of noise in the day now has a more sinister soundtrack, the clatter of a guard's boots, the drunken singing from a far-off tavern, and the whispers of a clandestine deal taking place in an alley. You've heard stories of Roman bandits and thieves, but you're surprised to find that the most common crimes aren't grand robberies but rather small, petty thefts, pickpockets, or loculory, are a constant nuisance. You see a man trying to deftly lift a small purse from the belt of a merchant. He's not a master criminal, he's just a desperate guy trying to make a living. You also notice the prevalence of graffiti. It's not just a modern phenomenon. Romans loved to write on walls, from witty poems to political insults to crude jokes. You see a wall with a drawing of a man and a woman, and a crude little note scrawled underneath. It's a little bit of a surprise to see this kind of low-level, surprisingly modern-feeling crime in a place you thought was all about grand emperors and military conquests. You realize that ancient Rome, like any other major city, was just full of regular people trying to get by, some of them more honestly than others. As you walk, you have to be careful of more than just pickpockets. The streets are still a mess. And without streetlights, you have to rely on the flickering glow of a few lamps in doorways or the light of the full moon. You've heard that wealthy Romans would hire slaves, called lanternari, to walk in front of them at night, just to light their way. You, of course, have no such luxury, so you have to tread carefully. You're also told that Roman building codes were a suggestion, not a rule, and you have to watch out for things falling off of balconies. A Roman poet, Juvenal, even warned of the danger of a broken pot being dropped on your head from a high window. You look up nervously as you walk past a rickety-looking insula. Then there's the crime of violence, which is always a possibility. While there's a city watch, the vigils, they're more concerned with putting out fires than with preventing crime. You hear a loud argument from a tavern, and you see two men stumbling out, drunk and angry. You quickly step into a doorway to avoid them. You're told that most nighttime violence is a result of drunken fights or personal disputes, not organized gangs. Historians still argue about the true level of danger in Roman cities at night, with some suggesting it was a hotbed of crime and others arguing that it was no more dangerous than a modern city. You're starting to think it's a bit of both, but with the added anxiety of not having any police force to call. You'd have to rely on yourself. And you're not a gladiator. As you finally make it to your small, dark room, you realize just how vulnerable you are. You're a foreigner, without a network of friends or family. And you're surrounded by people who are just trying to get by, no matter what it takes. It's a sobering thought. You lock the flimsy door and lay down on the hard bed. But you can't get the sounds of the night out of your head. The Roman Empire, you've realized, isn't just an empire of power and glory. It's also an empire of everyday fears and anxieties, the kind that keep you awake at night. After a night of restless sleep, you consider your options. You've seen the civilian side of Rome, and it's not for you. The crime, the stench, The general lack of safety, it all feels a bit much. So, a new idea begins to form in your head. What about joining the Roman army? The legionaries are famous, powerful, and respected. It's a chance to see the world and maybe even earn some land when you retire. You head to the nearest military recruitment office. And the reality of a soldier's life quickly sets in. The recruitment officer is a gruff man with a weathered face and a missing finger. He looks you over, and you get the sense that you're not exactly gladiator material. He hands you a small bronze coin and a wooden tablet to sign. But before you can do anything, he starts laying out the grim reality of life in the Roman legion. First, you learn that this is not a short-term gig. A legionary served for a minimum of 25 years. That's a quarter of a century of your life. Dedicated to the army, you'd be sworn to the emperor and the state. And your loyalty would be tested constantly. You also learn that the pay isn't great. You'd get a small stipend, but a significant portion of it would be deducted for things like food, equipment, and even your burial fund. A soldier's life, it turns out, is a bit like being an indentured servant. The officer then shows you the equipment you'd be required to carry: a heavy iron helmet, a chainmail shirt, a large shield, and a sword and dagger. And that's just the basics. You also have to carry your own food: a water skin, a pot for cooking, and a heavy wooden pole for building a camp. The total weight is around 60 pounds, and you're expected to march with it for miles every day. You can feel your back aching just at the thought of it. Then he tells you about the training. It's brutal, relentless, and designed to break you down and build you back up as a disciplined killing machine. You'd be forced to march for miles every day in full gear, practice with heavy wooden swords, and learn how to build and dismantle a camp in a matter of minutes. The discipline is severe, and punishments for even minor infractions can be harsh. You hear about fustuarium, where a soldier who deserts or commits a grave crime is beaten to death by his fellow soldiers. You realize that this isn't just a job, it's a way of life. And it's a life built on a foundation of pain and obedience. The officer even tells you that a good commander will find a reason to punish a soldier every day, just to keep them in line. A historian once argued that the strict discipline was the key to the Roman army's success, while others say it was just a way to keep a restless, often unhappy, group of men in line. You're starting to think it's the latter. The officer then tells you about the dangers. It's not just the battles, which are brutal and bloody affairs. It's also the mundane dangers of daily life. Diseases, a lack of sanitation, and poor medical care would be a constant threat. A simple wound could lead to a fatal infection. You'd also be constantly on the move, marching in all weather, and sleeping on the ground. A good portion of a legionary's life was spent not in combat, but in building things: bridges, roads, and forts. This is the quirky tidbit you learn. The Roman army was as much an engineering corps as it was a fighting force. The famous Roman roads weren't just built by slaves, they were built by legionaries. This kind of work was considered crucial to the Roman Empire's expansion and control. As you look at the tablet, the weight of the decision falls on you. You could sign up and become a part of the most powerful military machine the world has ever known. Or you could go back to the stinky, dangerous streets of Rome. You think about the 60 pounds of gear, the 25 years of service, and the constant threat of a fatal wound or a brutal punishment. You politely hand the coin back to the officer and say you'll think about it. You've seen enough to know that you wouldn't last a day in a Roman legion, let alone 25 years. You're starting to feel like there's no safe place for you in this empire. Back on the streets of Rome, your grand idea of becoming a soldier has vanished like a dream. But the stress of it all, combined with the general filth of the city, has done a number on you. You've come down with a fever, and you're feeling miserable. You decide to seek out a doctor, a medicus, and you're led to a small shop that smells of herbs and something else, something vaguely metallic. The doctor, a serious-looking man with a neatly trimmed beard, examines you. He feels your pulse, looks at your tongue, and listens to your breathing. He then declares that you have an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. This is the cornerstone of Roman medicine, a concept borrowed from the Greeks. They believed that health was a result of these humors being in balance, and sickness was a result of them being out of whack. It's a beautifully simple idea, but you're not so sure it's correct. The doctor's treatment plan is a series of things that sound like they'll make you feel worse, not better. First, he suggests a round of bloodletting. He produces a small knife and a bowl and gestures for you to hold out your arm. The idea is that the fever is caused by an excess of hot blood, and letting some out will restore the balance. You politely decline, remembering a modern history class where you learned that this practice often killed more people than it cured. He then suggests a round of purgatives, a kind of Roman laxative, to clear out your system. He explains that it will help get rid of the excess black bile that he suspects is causing your lethargy. You politely decline again, trying to explain that you just want some medicine, not a medieval enema. He then offers you a range of strange concoctions. One is a mixture of crushed herbs, wine, and a bit of honey. It sounds palatable, but you're not so sure about the ingredients. Another is a poultice of crushed animal dung and spider webs to put on your chest. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from the ancient Egyptian section, and you realize that ancient medicine has a weird obsession with animal waste. You politely refuse, but he's insistent. It's a tried and true remedy, he says, passed down from my father. You can't help but feel a little cynical about his methods. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman medicine, while sometimes effective, was also based on superstition and a lack of understanding of germs and anatomy. Surgeons, for example, were often more skilled at treating wounds sustained in battle than at curing internal illnesses. You also learn that there were no licenses for doctors, so anyone could call themselves a medicus. There were street vendors selling snake oil and quacks with bizarre remedies. You could be getting a treatment from a well-trained physician or from a charlatan who just wants to take your money. Historians still argue whether Roman doctors were more effective than the home remedies used by most people. You're starting to think that the best remedy is just to go to sleep and hope for the best. As you leave the doctor's office, you feel even sicker than before. You decide to take a chance on a quirky tidbit you heard about: the use of pig's blood for some ailments. A Roman doctor named Pliny the Elder wrote about a number of unusual remedies, including one that suggested drinking pig's blood to help with certain conditions. You can't bring yourself to even consider it. You stumble back to your room and collapse on the bed. You realize that a simple fever in ancient Rome could easily be a death sentence. Not because of the disease itself, but because of the cures. You're starting to realize that the lack of modern medicine is not just an inconvenience, it's a terrifying life or death reality. You just hope you wake up tomorrow. You wake up the next morning, weak but alive. The fever has broken, and you decide that staying in Rome is a bad idea. The city itself is trying to kill you, and you're not going to give it the satisfaction. You decide to get out, to venture beyond the city gates and see the countryside, to breathe some clean air. You hire a cart to take you a short distance from the city. And as you get further from Rome, the landscape begins to change. The bustling, dirty urban sprawl gives way to rolling hills and fields of grain. You see small villages, or vici, and scattered farms, or villi. It's a pastoral scene, but you quickly realize that this isn't the peaceful, idyllic countryside you imagined. The Roman countryside is a working landscape, and it's a hard one at that. You see a group of men and women working in a field, their backs bent under the sun. They're planting crops, and you notice that they're using a simple wooden plow, pulled by a pair of oxen. The work is backbreaking, and you can see the toll it's taking on their bodies. You also notice that the farms are a mix of small plots and large, sprawling estates, or latifundia, worked by slaves. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Roman economy was powered by agriculture, and a huge part of that agriculture was dependent on slave labor. A Roman villa was more than just a home, it was a self-sufficient agricultural center. The owner would often live a luxurious life, while the slaves did all the hard work. As you travel further, you notice the lack of trees. Much of Italy was deforested to make way for agriculture, and the wood was used for building, fuel, and the military. This deforestation led to soil erosion and other environmental problems. And it's a quirky tidbit you never thought about before. The Romans were great builders, but they were also a bit of a disaster for the environment. You see a small stream, and you realize that it's probably contaminated from all the agricultural runoff. You decide that you'll stick to the water from your own waterskin. And then you enter a forest. This is the untamed wilderness, and it's a completely different kind of danger. The forests are full of wild animals, from wolves to boars, and you're told that bandits often hide out here. You're told a story by your cart driver about a man who was robbed on the road and left for dead. You realize that outside of the Roman sphere of influence, there's no law, no protection. It's just you and the wilderness. The driver also tells you that it's a bad idea to travel at night. He says that the spirits of the dead, or lemures, roam the land after dark. He's probably just a superstitious man, but you decide to take his advice anyway. Historians still argue whether the Roman belief in spirits was just a way to explain the dangers of the night or if it was a deeply held religious belief. You're starting to think it's a bit of both. As you look around, you realize that the Roman Empire isn't just a city of marble and stone, it's a vast, sprawling land of farms, forests, and dangers. You're starting to see the true scale of the empire. And it's a bit overwhelming. The Romans may have built roads and aqueducts, but they didn't tame the whole world. A huge part of the landscape was still wild, and a huge portion of the population was still living a hard, brutal life. You decide that the city was a bad idea, but the country isn't much better. You're starting to think that there's no place for a modern person in this ancient world. After your brief, and frankly, terrifying, foray into the Roman countryside, you decide to get back on a main road. A proper Roman road. You've heard so much about them, about how they're perfectly straight and built to last. You find a section of the famous Via Appia, the Appian Way, and you're impressed. It's a marvel of engineering. A wide, paved road with a solid foundation and a smooth surface. It's the highway of the ancient world, and you can see why it was so important for trade and military movements. But you quickly learn that even these perfect roads have their own set of problems. They're a long way from the modern interstate system. First, there's the speed. While the roads are straight, you're traveling at the pace of a horse-drawn cart, or on foot, and it's painfully slow. You can cover a few miles in a day if you're lucky. A messenger could travel faster, but for a normal person, a journey of 100 miles could take a week or more. There are no rest stops, no gas stations, and no motels. You have to rely on small inns, or tabernae, along the road, which are often dirty, expensive, and full of unsavory characters. A quirky tidbit is that Roman inns were so notorious for their poor quality that wealthy Romans often preferred to stay with friends or family rather than risk a night in a roadside inn. You're starting to get the sense that even a simple trip from one city to another is a major undertaking. A true test of endurance. Then there are the other dangers of the road. While the roads themselves are well built, they're not always safe. You see a group of soldiers marching, their hobnailed boots making a rhythmic clatter on the stone. You have to give them a wide berth. You also have to be on the lookout for bandits, especially in more remote areas. The cart driver you're traveling with keeps a watchful eye on the tree line. And you get the sense that this is a common occurrence. Historians still argue about the true level of danger on Roman roads. Some believe they were well patrolled and safe, while others say they were a constant threat to travelers. You're starting to think it's a bit of both, depending on where you are. Another mainstream fact you learn is that the Roman roads weren't just for people. They were for everything. You see carts hauling everything from grain to wine to building materials. You also see flocks of sheep and herds of cattle being driven to market. The road is a living, breathing artery of the empire, and you're just a small part of it. The road is also full of landmarks, from small shrines to the gods to impressive monuments and tombs. The Romans believed that you should bury your dead along a road, so you can see them and remember them as you travel. It's a beautifully morbid tradition. As you look at the seemingly endless straight line of the road stretching out in front of you, you realize that it's a metaphor for the Roman Empire itself. It's a system built on order, on logic, on getting from point A to point B as efficiently as possible. But underneath that order, there's a mess of chaos, danger, and a slow, grueling pace of life. You're so used to hopping in a car and driving for hours on end, barely thinking about the journey. Here, the journey is everything. It's a test of your patience, your strength, and your luck. You're starting to think that you wouldn't last a day on a Roman road, let alone a lifetime. The idea of traveling anywhere, even to a nearby town, is now a source of deep anxiety. You just want to go home. Tired of walking and traveling, you decide to try your hand at shopping. You've got a few of your modern coins on you, and you're hoping to trade them for some Roman currency and buy a few necessities. You head to the Forum, the commercial and civic center of Rome. It's a bustling, crowded space, a mix of markets, temples, and government buildings. The noise is deafening, and the smells are a mix of fresh bread, spices, and the ever-present stench of the city. You find a money changer and try to figure out the Roman monetary system. It's a confusing mix of gold coins, silver coins, and bronze coins. There's the aureus, gold, the denarius, silver, and the sestertius, bronze. You're told that the value of these coins can fluctuate, and the money changer is more than happy to give you a terrible exchange rate. You're starting to feel like you're being ripped off, and you've only just begun. You then try to buy some bread, a staple of the Roman diet. You find a baker's stall, and a large, round loaf of bread is sitting on a stone counter. You're told that bread is a subsidized food, a crucial part of the Roman government's policy to keep the poor from rioting. But you're a foreigner, so you have to pay the full price. The price, you realize, is surprisingly high. You can't believe how much a simple loaf of bread costs. You also notice that the bread isn't the clean, perfect loaf you're used to. It's often mixed with a bit of grit, or even small stones. From the grinding process, a quirky tidbit you learn is that bakers' ovens were a public resource in some neighborhoods, and women would often bring their own dough to bake in them. This was a way for the poor to have access to fresh bread without having to pay for a baker's services. You then try to buy some clothes, and you're shocked by the cost of a simple tunic. The clothes are all hand-woven, and the wool and linen are expensive. You also realize that there's no such thing as a ready-to-wear garment. Everything is custom-made, and you have to hire a tailor to make your clothes. The idea of having to hire a person just to make a simple tunic for you is a bit overwhelming. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman society was obsessed with class and status. And your clothes were a big part of that. The quality of your tunic, the color of your toga, and the number of pleats in your clothes all said something about your place in society. The idea of fashion, as we know it today, didn't exist in the same way. It was all about conformity to your social class. As you walk through the Forum, you see all kinds of goods for sale, from exotic spices to fresh fish to imported wine. But you also notice how much things cost. A bottle of fine olive oil is incredibly expensive, and a jar of garum is a fortune. You realize that the cost of living in ancient Rome is a lot higher than you thought. The poor, you learn, would often eat a simple meal of porridge and bread, while the wealthy would have a feast of 100 different dishes. The gap between the rich and the poor, you realize, is a chasm. Historians still argue whether the Roman economy was a free market or a highly regulated one. You're starting to think it was a bit of both, with the government controlling the prices of staples like bread, but the price of luxury goods being set by the market. You decide that you've seen enough. You can't afford to live here, and you don't have the skills or the social standing to make a living. You feel a pang of homesickness, a longing for a world where you can just walk into a store and buy a pair of jeans without having to worry about your social standing or the cost of a simple meal. You wouldn't just not last a day here, you'd probably starve. As you wander through the streets of Rome, now with a new appreciation for the simple act of buying a loaf of bread, you start to notice something else: the sheer, overwhelming presence of slavery. They're everywhere, a constant, silent force in the city. You see them in the markets, carrying heavy loads for their masters. You see them in the homes, serving dinner to their owners. You see them on the streets, sweeping up the endless filth and trying to make some sense of the chaos. You knew about Roman slavery, of course, but seeing it in person is a different kind of shock. It's not a fringe part of society, it's the very engine of it. You also see the different types of slaves. There are the domestic slaves, who work in the homes of the wealthy. They often wear simple tunics and have a more intimate relationship with their masters. But their lives are entirely dependent on the whim of their owners. Then there are the public slaves, who work for the government, doing everything from maintaining the roads to working in the public baths. And then, there are the worst off, the slaves who work in the mines or on the large farms. The latifundia you saw earlier. Their lives are short, brutal, and filled with back-breaking labor. A mainstream historical fact is that at the height of the Roman Empire, it's estimated that slaves made up 15 to 20% of the population. A huge part of the empire's success was built on this human exploitation. You also notice the casual indifference of Roman society to the suffering of slaves. You see a master yell at a slave, and no one bats an eye. You see a slave being whipped for a minor infraction, and people just walk by. You realize that in this society, slaves are not seen as people, but as property. They have no rights, no legal standing, and their lives are entirely at the mercy of their owners. This casual brutality is a deeply disturbing part of life in ancient Rome. You can't help but feel a little sick to your stomach. A quirky tidbit you learn is that a slave who was freed, or a liberatus, could have a more respected position in society than a poor Roman citizen. Some liberti even became very wealthy and powerful, but they were still looked down upon by the old Roman aristocracy. You learn that slavery wasn't just a result of conquest. People could become slaves for a number of reasons. They could be born into it. They could be sold into it to pay off a debt, or they could be captured in a war. The Roman slave markets were a common sight, and you see a group of newly captured slaves, chained together and waiting to be sold. Their faces are a mixture of fear, despair, and a blank, hollow-eyed resignation. It's a truly horrifying sight, and you have to turn away. You realize that a big part of surviving in Rome isn't just about the physical dangers, it's about the moral compromises you have to make. Historians still argue about the true nature of Roman slavery. Some suggest that it was a more humane system than the chattel slavery of the American South, while others argue that its sheer scale and the casual indifference to human suffering make it just as brutal. You're starting to think it's just a different kind of brutal. You wouldn't last a day here because you'd have to live in a society that so casually and brutally dehumanizes a large portion of its population. The idea of living a life where you have to ignore this level of suffering is more terrifying than any fever or bandit. After witnessing the casual cruelty of Roman slavery, you find yourself seeking some kind of spiritual solace. You decide to visit a temple, but you quickly realize that Roman religion is not what you expected. It's not a religion of deep, personal faith, but rather a contractual relationship between man and the gods. The gods are a vast, convoluted pantheon, and they have to be placated with rituals and sacrifices. You see a man leading a small goat to a temple, and you're told that he's going to sacrifice it to the god Mars, in the hopes that Mars will look favorably on his business venture. It's a very transactional relationship, a kind of divine quid pro quo. You also notice the sheer number of gods. There are gods for everything: the god of the hearth, the god of the doorway, the goddess of the harvest, and even the goddess of the sewers. It's a bit overwhelming, and you realize that you'd have to perform a dozen different rituals every day just to get through a week without offending a god. A quirky tidbit you learn is that a Roman would often have a small shrine, or lorarium, in their home, where they would make offerings to the household gods. It's a very private, personal form of worship, and it shows that even in this public-facing religion, there was a private, more intimate side to it. The most jarring thing, you realize, is the lack of a moral code. Roman religion isn't about being a good person or following a set of moral rules. It's about performing the right rituals at the right time. The gods are not seen as moral arbiters, but as powerful beings that can be appeased with the right prayers and sacrifices. You also learn that the Romans were very open to new gods. When they conquered a new land, they would often adopt the local gods and incorporate them into their own pantheon. It was a way to win the loyalty of the newly conquered people and to ensure that they had all their bases covered. This is a mainstream historical fact, and it shows how pragmatic the Roman worldview was. Their religion, like everything else, was a tool for social and political control. You also learn about the role of omens and prophecy in daily life. You see a priest, or augur, observing the flight of birds, trying to decipher their meaning. You're told that a Roman would never start a new business venture, or go on a long journey, or even get married without consulting an augur. The gods, it seems, were constantly sending signals, and it was up to the priests to interpret them. This reliance on omens and prophecy made daily life a bit of a gamble. You could be on your way to do something important, and then a bird flies by, and you have to go home and start all over again. Historians still argue whether the reliance on omens was a genuine belief or just a political tool used by the elite to control the masses. You're starting to think it's a bit of both. As you stand in the forum, surrounded by temples and statues of gods, You realize that you wouldn't last a day here because you'd have no idea what to believe. You can't just pick and choose your gods. You have to accept the whole pantheon. You can't just go to a temple and pray for a better life. You have to perform a ritual and hope the god is listening. It's a spiritual system that feels alien, transactional, and a bit scary. You're starting to realize that the Roman Empire wasn't just a place of physical and social dangers, it was also a place of spiritual and moral ones. You're starting to feel a bit lost. You've tried to navigate the streets, the army, the medicine, and even the religion of the Roman Empire, and you've come to a single, sobering conclusion. You would not last a day here. The city's filth, the danger of its streets, the brutality of its entertainment, the indifference to human suffering, and the bizarre, sometimes deadly, nature of its medicine and food all conspire against you. You are a product of a different world, a world of sanitation, safety, and moral codes that simply do not exist here. You are an alien in a society that doesn't know what to do with you. And you can't survive in a world that doesn't care about you. And now, as you stand in the forum, the sun beginning to set, you feel something shift. The crowds are thinning, the noise is fading, and a sense of unease begins to settle over the city. You feel a chill, a feeling that this incredible, powerful empire is not as eternal as it seems. This is the beginning of the end. You learn that the Roman Empire, especially the western half, didn't fall in a single, dramatic moment. It was a slow, agonizing decline, a long, drawn-out fade into obscurity. This is a mainstream historical fact, one that is often lost in the dramatic depictions of a single collapse. It wasn't a lightning strike, it was a slow bleed. You begin to hear about the political chaos, the constant struggle for power. Emperors rise and fall in a matter of months, sometimes even weeks. The military, once the pillar of the empire, is now a political force, putting its own commanders on the throne and demanding more and more pay. The Roman economy, once a massive, thriving machine, is in shambles. The roads, once the pride of the empire, are falling into disrepair. The aqueducts are leaking, and the city's population is dwindling. The borders, once a source of pride, are now a source of constant anxiety, with barbarian tribes pushing inward, and the Roman legions stretched thin. You realize that the very foundation of the empire, the things that made it so powerful, its roads, its military, its political stability, are all beginning to crumble. A quirky tidbit you learn is that one of the reasons for the decline was a series of plagues and epidemics that swept through the empire, killing millions of people. These plagues, which we now know were likely smallpox and measles, decimated the population and made it harder to maintain the vast empire. Historians still argue whether the plagues were a result of climate change, a lack of sanitation, or just a cruel twist of fate. But their impact was undeniable. The sheer scale of the death and suffering made it impossible for the empire to function as it once did. The city you're in now is a shadow of its former self, a ghost of the vibrant metropolis it once was. As you stand in the fading light, you realize that you've come to the end of your journey. You came here thinking you could survive, but you've learned that a Roman's life, even a rich one, was a constant battle against disease, danger, and a brutal social order. The empire, for all its glory, was a hard place to live. And now, you're seeing its final, tragic act. You wouldn't last a day in ancient Rome. You wouldn't survive the smells, the dirt, the food, or the social cruelty. But more importantly, you wouldn't survive the long, slow, grinding decline of an empire that's just too big and too sick to last. The last rays of the sun are dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in a soft, fading orange. The distant hum of the city is quieter now, a tired, weary sound. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the day's journey settle into memory. The sounds of a single cricket chirping somewhere nearby begin to fill the silence. A peaceful, rhythmic pulse. The air feels cooler now, no longer heavy with the heat and chaos of the day. Let yourself feel that quietness, that peaceful calm that follows a long day's journey. The world you've been in is fading, becoming just a story. The dust on your tunic, the phantom smells of the street, it's all gone now. You are safe, you are warm, the world around you is familiar and kind. Let your mind drift away from the noise and the chaos, away from the struggle, and toward a place of rest. The history you've learned is a fascinating, complex tapestry, But for now, you don't have to worry about it. Just let the sound of my voice and the soft hum of the evening guide you to a place of comfort and sleep. Everything is okay. You are home now.